Okay, is this good? You can hear me cool? Yeah? Awesome. Okay, well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2023 Climate Justice Teach-In at UW-Madison. My name is Marina Karakish. This is Lucas Lobrelio, and we are both seniors here at UW, working in the Education and Outreach Department at the Wisconsin Energy Institute. As co-organizers of this event, we are so very excited to see you all here today and enthusiastic about expanding your understanding of climate justice. We hope that tonight is just as impactful for all of you as it has been for us in planning it.
So as we said, we represent the Wisconsin Energy Institute, which is the Center for Collaborative Cross-Disciplinary Energy Research at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and the primary host of tonight's event. WEI currently supports over 200 faculty and researchers propelling us towards our clean energy future. The major focuses of the Wisconsin Energy Institute as a broader institution are threefold. First off, research, of course. Second, preparing future leaders through classes, certificate programs, and undergraduate research positions. And finally, enhancing community understanding of energy-related issues through community events, forums, science festival outreach, and partnerships with community organizations that are doing some of the most impactful work on the ground to make our visions of a sustainable future a reality. We are located at 1552 University Avenue between the departments of biochemistry and mechanical engineering. Feel free to stop by anytime to study or take a look around.
And before we get started with our broader event, we do want to also acknowledge that the location of our event tonight and the University of Wisconsin-Madison as a whole occupy ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejope since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. Today, we respect the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin, and recognize that no one acknowledgement can encompass the entire lived experience of Wisconsin's Indigenous peoples. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. We recognize that Indigenous nations worldwide are doing some of the most leading work in transitioning us away from fossil fuels towards a sustainable and resilient energy and environmental future that is affordable, accessible, and responsive to the needs of all people. For more information and links to the web pages of the Wisconsin First Nations to hear about their experience and contributions in their own words, visit the Wisconsin Union or any of your academic department's land acknowledgement pages online. And with that all being said, let's get into why we're all gathering here today.
Okay, some of you may have attended past versions of this event. We've been hosting this teach-in for 3 years now, both virtually and on campus. It's part of Bard College's annual worldwide teach-in on climate and justice, which encourages universities, colleges, K-12 schools, and faith communities in countries all around the world to gather. This global initiative brings together community members like yourselves to discuss tangible, just, and bottom-up solutions to climate change that are fueled by local knowledge and local sources of hope. In 2023, over 250 teach-ins were held across the globe, from as nearby as Oshkosh to as far away as Kenya, Pakistan, and the Philippines. By attending this teach-in, you are taking part in a truly global movement to address the environmental and social harms of climate change. Go you guys.
Woo, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so as Lucas said, this is the third year that we've participated in the worldwide teach-in, and this is the first year to include an in-class model for climate discussion. This was known as the #MakeClimateAClass initiative, which some of you may have participated in your courses. This year's faculty that represented it when they facilitated in-class climate discussions related to their course material represented over 25 UW-Madison departments, from astronomy to kinesiology to political science, and engaged an estimated 2,500 students on campus. Hopefully some of you here are among them. In addition to serving as a gathering space for the broader campus community, this event is intended to serve as a plenary event for this initiative. If you're interested in taking part of this initiative or other projects on the UW campus to implement climate education across disciplines, please feel free to reach out to any of us after the event. So to get into our plans for the rest of the evening really briefly, tonight's agenda is pretty light. After we conclude our introduction here, we will first listen to a special keynote presented by Dr. Jonathon Patz. After a few minutes of Q&A, we'll break for a larger snack break where they'll bring out more food and some small group discussion. Then we'll return together and meet with our panel of student sustainability leaders. We'll hear from them about their experiences engaging with climate and environmental justice throughout the course of their college careers. Then we'll open it up again to audience Q&A.
All right, a couple of housekeeping details. First off, if you didn't notice me fiddling around with my laptop at the beginning of this presentation, this event is being recorded and it's going to be posted to the WEI website as well as our YouTube channel. So if you have people that weren't able to attend today, please direct them there. Additionally, we do have water coolers, and there's also a drinking fountain and restrooms located out the door to the end of the hallway and to the right. Also, our catering is entirely vegetarian friendly with some vegan and gluten-free options. Feel free to grab some before we begin our keynote presentation, like over the next couple minutes. We ask that you refrain from going to get more during the keynote, if you will.
And then really briefly, we do want to thank our partners. Our partners for this event are the National Institute for Environmental Studies, the Center for Climatic Research, and the Office of Sustainability. This event is organized in the spirit of all the wonderful Earth Week programming that occurred last week. Hopefully some of you got the chance to attend some of these great events. And if you're looking for other ways to engage with these sorts of topics, stay tuned for a few events we'll be highlighting at the end of the teach-in. I think that's all the housekeeping introductory remarks that we need to make. So with that out of the way, I'm going to hand it over to Lucas to do a brief introduction of our keynote speaker, Dr. Jonathon Patz.
Jonathon Patz is Vilas Distinguished Achievement Professor and John P. Holton Endowed Chair of Health and the Environment at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. From 2011 to 2022, he served as inaugural director of UW-Madison's Global Health Institute, and he has faculty appointments in the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies and the Department of Population Health Sciences. Patz also directs the university's Planetary Health Scholars Program. In 2019, he was elected into the National Academy of Medicine for his pioneering work at the intersection of climate change and public health. His efforts date back to 1994 when he convened the first ever session and wrote the first policy resolution on climate change for the American Public Health Association. For over 25 years, Professor Patz has taught and conducted research on climate change and has published over 200 science publications and several textbooks on environmental public health. Dr. Patz co-chaired the health report for the first congressionally mandated U.S. National Assessment on Climate Change, and for 15 years served as a lead author for the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, the organization that shared the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. With that all said, we'd like to welcome our very special guests, Jonathon Patz, to the stage.
Good.
Okay, cool.
Lucas and Marina, thank you so much. You don't know how privileged and honor I was when you invited me to kick off this event tonight. I've been working on climate change for 29 years. I think I started when I was 11, right? Anyway. So I am just honored to be here and present with this exciting initiative. And I'm going to be talking about climate justice, but through my public health lens. I'm an environmental health scientist, so I'm going to be talking about climate justice and through the public health lens. First, a couple of slides of what you already know. You've all seen the latest IPCC assessment showing that human influence has warmed our climate faster than any time in the last 2,000 years. And quoting from last year's IPCC report, it is now indisputable that human activities are causing climate change and making for all these hazardous weather events. And I started with the IPCC in 1995 when they said there's a suggested influence on the climate, and then every iterative report, gets more and more certain with the computing power. There's absolutely no question that burning fossil fuels is heating up our planet. It's indisputable now. There's no argument with climate science. And when this report came out, the UN Secretary General called this Code Red for Humanity. So I know you've seen this. And you probably remember last summer, this heat dome, where we saw record-breaking temperatures across Western North America. Washington State and Oregon and British Columbia had incredibly hot temperatures. Vinyl siding was melting off of houses. People died. One town in British Columbia, Linton, British Columbia, reached 121 degrees Fahrenheit, the hottest temperature ever seen in Canada. And within 48 hours, the town burned to the ground. And of course, with heating, we do see drought and fires. So with the heat wave, until the atmospheric river that dumped all the snow on California, the Southwest was experiencing its worst drought in history. And so we see wildfires with drought. And if any of you went outside ever in the summertime in Wisconsin, I'm sure you noticed the orange sun in the summertime last year, and that was from the smoke from those fires. Well, there is a public health component to the wildfire smoke, and in fact, the fine particulate pollution from wildfires turns out to be really hazardous for children. So here we're going into a little bit of the equity angle here, and that's not fair when children are exposed to this smoke that's 10 times worse than other forms of particulate matter. So that was last summer. And 1 year prior to last summer, we also had a heat dome. And, you know, as I said, I've been working in this for a long time, and I had never heard of a heat dome before. Maybe I heard one of one a couple of years before this, but I don't think so. 2020, 2 years ago. And so a heat dome is a super hot heat wave that lasts for a very long time over an extended area. So, you know, enter this new term, heat dome, that explains how severe our heat waves are getting. Well, the timing of this heat wave couldn't have been worse, thinking about equity, because that heat dome happened at the end of the moratorium on eviction. And so we had a triple threat. We had the COVID pandemic, the end of eviction moratorium, and a heat wave. And think about people that don't have a home, don't have air conditioning, they have to go to a cooling center in the middle of a pandemic. Climate justice. So I have been using this slide for a long time, but just to define why I went into this field, when you think about the attributes of climate change, the physical attributes of climate change, rising temperatures, sea level rise, not only from land-based glaciers dropping, sliding into the ocean, but also simply from thermal expansion of salt water, and extremes of the water cycle, more droughts, floods, and fires. When you think about that, these are the different pathways through which climate change affects our health. And this is why I view climate change as the largest, most serious public health crisis of our times. And it's why I dedicated my career to this problem, and I saw so many ways that we can be affected. So I'm just going to give a couple examples from this. Heat waves, right? So how many of you are from Milwaukee? 2 of you, right? So right now, Milwaukee gets about 9 days that are 90 degrees or hotter in the summertime. According to analysis by Dan Weimont in the Nelson Institute the Center for Climatic Research, that number will triple, almost triple, to 25 days in a few decades. So more heat waves and more hot days. And if you live in a city with sprawling asphalt roads and black asphalt roads and concrete buildings that retain the heat, you get what is called the urban heat island effect. So many big cities can have very hot temperatures. So I want to bring in the next climate justice story when you think about an urban heat island. Let's take a look at formerly redlined neighborhoods in one city, the city of Richmond. So you can see the red line neighborhoods, they're also the hottest. No surprise, because investments in wealthier neighborhoods, you'll invest in parks and have trees and golf courses. You know, you're going to build a highway, you're going to, you know, in the redlined areas, you know, it only got worse and worse as far as investment, lack of investment in urban planning. So redlining in the urban environment, this is an environmental justice issue when you think about heat waves. Another heat issue is thinking about hot temperatures and growing crops. We all know that it needs to be warm enough to grow certain crops. It also can't be too warm. You know, crops, you know, they have this nice envelope to, you know, the low temperature, high temperature. If you go outside of the envelope, it's a problem. And this map shows the where we're going to see record-breaking summer temperatures. And if you just focus on the red, and let's focus on the bottom map, which is end of this century. So by the end of this century, everything in red has a 90% probability or greater of having a record-breaking summer temperature. When you think about crops, already we have 800 million people at risk of hunger. And according to Roz Naylor, who is an agronomist at Stanford University, this type of temperature would double the number of people at risk of hunger. And notice it's mostly in the tropics, in a lot of poor countries. Another climate justice issue. And this is just from last year's IPCC report showing different projections for crops, for corn, rice, soybeans, and wheat, all across the board. They're going to be reduced in crop yields. So that's a justice equity thing when you think about hunger. How many pathogenic diseases, mostly infectious diseases, but also others like contact dermatitis from poison ivy, asthma from ragweed pollen, and a few other non-infectious diseases. How many of these human pathogenic diseases do you think are aggravated by climate? Well, this group out of the University of Hawaii did a systematic review and found more than 1,000 pathways are affected by extreme climatic events. One is mosquito-borne diseases. And these are very sensitive to climate because the difference between us mammals and that mosquito is what? Besides that you don't fly. And Lucas told me that at least half of you don't suck blood. Yeah, exactly. We're warm-blooded. Mosquitoes are cold-blooded. That means that the body temperature of that mosquito is exactly what the air temperature is. And if this mosquito, in fact, that species carries yellow fever, dengue fever, and Zika virus, whatever the air temperature is, that's how fast the viruses are going to be replicating inside that mosquito. It's a temperature-dependent biological system. Well, I asked Dan Weimont again to do some help me out here, and when Zika virus emerged on the scene, it was the winter of 2015. Also, the winter of 2015, we had one of the strongest El Niños that we've seen in recent history. And according to Dan's analysis, the temperatures across Brazil and Colombia were hotter than 2 standard deviations above a 60-year average. Really hot temperatures. And thinking about that cold-blooded mosquito that transmits more when it's hotter, it turns out that the ability of that mosquito to transmit virus, it's called the vectorial capacity, mosquito is the vector of the disease, it was at its highest level in the last 60 years. So the virus came to South America from international travel, probably the World Cup or canoe races, because there were outbreaks of Zika in Polynesia. But when that came, did this extreme temperature have something to do with Zika taking off? We think so. More studies need to be done, but the Zika virus is actually favored by warmer temperatures compared to the dengue virus in the same virus family. So another justice question for you. Take a look at this picture from Brazil. You can see on the left a Brazilian slum, a favela. And I asked the question, who would be more exposed to disease-carrying mosquitoes when you compare this? This is another climate justice issue. Now remember, it's not just temperatures, it's extremes of the hydrologic cycle, more flooding and more drought. This is the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, Wiki, showing that we have had much more rainfall, 7 inches more rainfall than several decades ago. And you can see the list of health impacts from heavy rain and flooding. We did a study showing that by mid-century, you'll get so much rain, heavy rain, that it'll overwhelm these systems that combine sewage and stormwater runoff. You get what are called combined sewage overflow events. That could double because it's very expensive to separate sewage and stormwater, even though we know it needs to be done. So that's a big problem. What about equity? What about justice? Well, thinking about flooding and water contamination, that is a big problem. But that's not what happens as far as emergency room visits. After flooding, what we see in the emergency rooms are asthmatics because of this situation. And if we're going to be seeing more flooding, we're going to be experiencing this exposure, and it's going to be, it's a problem. Where do you think in a place like Wisconsin, where do you think there may be poor housing located in our lake, our city among lakes? Probably low-lying areas, maybe even floodplains. And guess what? A racist past, a flooded future, the formerly red-line neighborhoods are the most at risk from this situation. Another climate justice dilemma. What about hurricanes? Here's a photo from Hurricane Katrina, massive hurricane that affected New Orleans. Who was not able to evacuate? Another climate justice challenge. And we just had flooding this past summer. This is from August of last summer in Pakistan. And you saw images like this. So thinking about countries now at risk from seeing extremes in climate. This is a map showing on the top, you see emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and the countries that are causing the problem. There's the United States lit up in red. Germany, Russia are pretty bad actors too. The bottom map is showing what this professor is calling multidimensional climate vulnerability. And you can see that, you can see where Afghanistan and Pakistan, you see India there lit up in red, and just to the left of India is Pakistan, darker red, and Afghanistan really red. So Pakistan and Afghanistan really vulnerable, but look at the top, they're in green. They're not causing the problem. That's climate injustice. So we actually, 16 years ago, we published something similar. We asked the question, of countries causing climate change, that's the top map, versus countries most sensitive to most at risk to climate sensitive diseases. On the bottom, you can see places like sub-Saharan Africa and India, where you've got lots of malaria, malnutrition, diarrheal disease. These are the most climate-sensitive countries experiencing harm. But look at the top map. Look at Africa, shrivels up, and you say, who's responsible for CO2 emissions? It's not Africa, it's the United States. Now, this is looking at 50-year aggregate of CO2 emissions. Right now, China is emitting more than we are. But for a 50-year aggregate, the United States is the most responsible country for today's climate change. And thinking about justice, is it fair that Americans with our energy consumption use up so much energy that we emit 6 times more CO2 than the average global citizen, and about 40 times more than somebody living in India? So I had the good fortune to present this environmental justice study to His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 2011. And if any of you have met him, he is a very smart person, and he cuts to the chase. He said, Jonathan, if you know pollution kills, your country is not showing much compassion, correct? I told him I would get back to him on that. That was a tough question. But when you think about it, you know, this is the image, you know, is that progress as we roll forward, as we sacrifice other parts of the world? It's not fair. We have some good news. I'm going to give you a little bit more good news, and then I'm going to stop. So the good news is that this current administration has passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in greenhouse gas reduction incentives we've ever experienced. So $370 billion over the next 10 years. And you can see that the orange in the graph, that Inflation Reduction Act brings us down to almost the level that we promised we'd reduce our emissions for the international treaties, the Conference of the Parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So the Inflation Reduction Act is a major first big step. We need more, but this is a major benefit. And from where I stand, I've actually been standing on the soapbox for a long time to say, addressing climate change, which presents huge challenges, also offers opportunities, and that saving the global climate crisis could be the greatest health opportunity that we've ever seen. Low carbon future could improve health and economic benefits, and the climate solutions double as health interventions. I'll just quickly give you some examples and then wrap it up. So we know that air pollution is harmful. It's estimated that 7 million people die prematurely because of burning dirty energy sources, burning fossil fuels. An unhealthy diet. I'm glad that we have a vegetarian food choices tonight, because a high-meat diet is not sustainable. It's also not good for our cardiovascular systems. And it's estimated that because of our diets, that 11 million people die prematurely because we have way too much red meat in the diet. And if you're in a poor country, too much starchy vegetables and not enough quality food. And finally, over-reliance on private motorized vehicle is leading to sedentary lifestyles. If we were to reverse that, right now, it's estimated that active travel saves about 4 million lives every year. So if you combine those numbers, 7, 11, and 4 million, golden opportunity to save lives from a low carbon economy, that's nearly half of all premature deaths every year. Which is why I am so jazzed about tackling climate change, because it's the healthiest thing that we can do. This is where we see mortality from fine particulate pollution from coal-fired power plants. In the United States, the Clean Air Act is amazing. The Clean Air Act that was passed in 1970, amendments in 1990. It's estimated that for every $1 investment in the Clean Air Act, you see a benefit return of $33 to $40. Huge benefits. But we still have problems. And from this map, we still have about 100,000 people that die from fossil fuels, from the air pollution in the clean United States. And guess what? Climate justice, historically, placement of power plants in large industries has disproportionately harmed Black, Indigenous, and low-income communities. One add-on climate justice, if you look at air pollution and COVID, if you're hospitalized for COVID, number one, minorities are at higher risk of being hospitalized for COVID. And if you are in the hospital with COVID and you are in places with high air pollution can increase your risk of dying up to 15%. So our group published this last year, led by my student Nick Mayu. The headlines of this decarbonizing the United States is that cutting air pollution from fossil fuels would save 50,000 lives every year. And our study's on the conservative side. There are other studies that say a lot more. So we'd save a lot of lives. This is where we would have the most savings, as far as the darker the blue, the more savings of lives. And finally, the transportation sector, we know that exercise is healthy. And the cities with the most walking and cycling have lower rates of obesity and diabetes. Exercise also reduces these other risks. Exercise is more than just burning calories. Contracting muscles are chemical factories for anti-cancer and anti-heart disease chemicals. Exercise is great, but I have a climate justice story here. When you look at this picture, on the far left, that's the average bicycle commuting in the United States. That's 1% average bicycle commuting. If you go to Madison, Wisconsin, you can see Madison, we are a platinum ranked city for bikeability. So we have 6 times more bicycle commuting than the national average. And if you go to Boulder, that's 10%, 10 times more. So we are platinum ranked for bikeability. It's not fair, though. I mean, when we talk about the fastest way to get around in Madison, door to door, is on a bicycle. And other people say, I'm looking out my window, I'm in another city. I came from Baltimore, Maryland. I tried to bicycle to work because it's so healthy, and quickly realized it is so dangerous. Forget it. I did it 3 times and said, I'm taking my life in my hands. That's not fair. It's not fair for people that live in cities that don't have a free choice of safely getting to work by alternative transportation. It's an equity challenge. Now, I'll wrap up by showing some work led by my student Nova Tebi and team, looking at moving forward policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so climate policies. Which policies can we choose that optimize a health benefit and an equity benefit? And so Nova and her team have looked across energy, food, and transportation, and actually we've looked at 5 other sectors as well, trying to give guidance to lawmakers to say, hey, if you're going to tackle climate change, number one, we know how serious climate change is, but think about the added benefits when you choose electric school buses and other types of policies. Which ones will not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but will maximize health and equity benefits? So in summary, I'll just remind you in 10 words, 5 truths about climate change. It's real. It's us. Remember, it's indisputable that it's human activity from burning fossil fuels and cutting rainforests, because CO2, they absorb CO2, the trees. So about 25% is cutting rainforests, but most of it is burning fossil fuels. So it's real. It's us. We're causing it. Experts agree. 99% of climate scientists actually studying this issue fully agree, compared to the public discourse that I would say we have too much evidence-free discourse right now, and we need to get back to the science. You know it's bad, all the risks and hazards, but there's hope and golden opportunities, especially looking at the health opportunities. So I seriously view that tackling climate change is the greatest opportunity that we have. And every crisis presents an opportunity, and the bigger the crisis, the bigger the opportunity. So today, we have the opportunity of a lifetime to seize the moment to decarbonize our economy and at the same time improve our health and reduce inequities. So with that, I thank you for your attention.
We have about 5 minutes for a Q&A. If anyone has any questions for Dr. Patz?
Yeah. So I am an MD, MPH. I first got medical boards in family medicine and then preventive medicine, board specialized in occupational and environmental medicine. And with that comes a master's of public health, and my focus was environmental epidemiology. So I came in from medicine, and climate justice was, much later for me, much later. Yeah, being influenced by people like Sumadu from the law school that wrote the book, Climate Justice, International Climate Change and Justice, something like that, right? That's the title? Okay. Human rights, climate change and human rights. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Oh,
No, I just, go ahead.
Yeah, so I heard there's a link between increasing global temperatures and the prevalence of allergies. Could you speak on that at all?
Well, in my hometown of Baltimore, Maryland, there was an experiment where the U.S. Department of Agriculture planted ragweed plants on top of the Science Center in downtown Baltimore. They planted some ragweed plants in a suburb and then out in the rural area. And the ragweed plants that were in the city area, in the inner city area, were there in Heat Island, made for higher temperatures and all the traffic, more CO2. Those ragweed plants produce far more ragweed pollen. So ragweed does much better with warmer temperatures and more CO2 in the atmosphere. Right now, Wisconsin has a ragweed pollen allergy season that is 13 days longer than it used to be. So a problem for asthmatics. But as I showed, the crop failures from these problems, from climate change, if you do like ragweed pollen and poison ivy, those plants do particularly well.
Thank you for your talk. That was really great. I had a question about whether or not you've been able to specifically study the urban development in Madison, because I know the South Park Street area is being redeveloped, and they're and also downtown with bigger buildings that house more people. Is there research on that yet, on what the impact will be for this city in particular?
I'll just say that there is tremendous opportunity in urban planning. Majority of people live in cities, and that will continue to grow. And to make cities that are compact and walkable, where you can have services to a lot of people, and there are big opportunities in urban planning. There's issues as far as the urban heat island and having green roofs, reflective surfaces, safe routes. There are enormous opportunities, but it can't be, it needs to be done very carefully, where you can't assume build a bike route and they will come. You need, for example, in poor communities, you need to be culturally sensitive. What does it mean to ride a bike? There needs to be a very integrated approach and not just say, yeah, let's just build some bike lanes, or let's just build bike lanes in rich neighborhoods. That would be bad news. So I don't know so well the history as far as Madison's urban planning. I do see someone that does in the back there. But anyway, this is where the urban, a lot of solutions will happen in the urban landscape. And it's something where all of you should work with urban planners and talk and show how you can optimize, you can have one decision in an urban area and have multiple benefits, be it better storm runoff, reduce urban heat island, better access to alternative train travel. So the urban space is a golden space to be working.
You talked about mitigation strategies, or things that can reduce emissions that have these health and equity benefits. Can you also talk about adaptation strategies that can mitigate some of the diseases or other impacts that have other health and equity benefits?
Yeah, so because of the inertia of the climate system that greenhouse gases last for a long period. Methane is one of the stronger ones, and that doesn't last as long, but CO2 lasts in the atmosphere for 50 to 120 years. So we're committed. We will be wanting some, and we'll be seeing more extremes in climate. The question is, can we ratchet down and not see those extremes? So we need to be prepared. We are going to have worse storms, droughts, fires. We are going to see that. So we need to be, planning accordingly. Ideally, adaptation strategies that we pick would also double as mitigation strategies. For example, reducing the urban heat island effect with green roofs and reflective surfaces, that would reduce energy demand, demand for cooling. So that would be a mitigation. It would double as a mitigation step, as well as cooling the city and being adaptive. So we definitely need some adaptation, but it can't be an either or. Think about, you've got a mess on the floor and we need to mop it up. But if we keep mopping up the mess without turning off the faucet, where are we, right? So ideally, we definitely need to protect people that are vulnerable. So adaptation planning, absolutely essential. But ideally, we want to be focused also on mitigation. Great question.
Yeah, I just have a question about, I guess, as a professor at UW, how do you balance, when the university does things that you might not agree with, or decisions that are made over funding or money, and just the overall infrastructure of how decisions are made. If you don't agree with something, but you have to go along with it since you're employed here, how do you manage that?
Yeah, well, I see Josh Arnold here from the Office of Sustainability. And I still want to know why the heck we don't have solar panels on all the new buildings. That's crazy. That's a missed opportunity. Yeah. Because the other thing is the economics. I presented at a La Follette Energy Policy Forum, and the person after me introduced himself as a conservative Republican for renewable energy. And he said, look, I am very conservative. I'm not into regulations. I'm in the free market. The reality now is, as of 2019, if you remove all subsidies, all government subsidies, and just had a level playing field, for the first time ever, the cheapest way to generate electricity is renewables and batteries. So, so a lot of decisions on campus, and of course the campus has invested in, what's the big solar thing in over the field in Pittsburgh. So the university is investing there, but there's no longer an economic reason, like, oh, it's too expensive to do that. That's old news. So I think that's something that we need to push for. I can tell you that the faculty senate, the student senate, and the staff senate, all three last 2 years ago, pushed for divestment, university divestment. I think that's something we should be also looking into. It's, the people there in the UW Foundation who I have the most respect for, and they're trying to take care of the university. They're good, but they need to hear that it's not an economic, it's not jumping off the cliff. It's actually silly to keep investing in fossil fuels. They're going to be stranded assets. So things are aligning. It makes sense to invest in new technology. And if you invest in the new technology and you added the health and environmental benefits on the back end, it's like absolutely no argument. Go ahead.
So as you mentioned, and we all know, marginalized communities are going to be the ones that are most affected by climate change. However, it's firstly very difficult to get climate policy, enacted at all in the United States. And second of all, to prioritize and target communities that aren't the ones that make up the government. Do you have any suggestions or, for policies or ways that we can go about enacting policies that will actually help those specifically disadvantaged communities?
Well, I will say that number one, it is important to act locally, and we'll get a lot done if we act locally. I can tell you that the Healthy Climate Wisconsin group, formerly called the Health Professionals for Climate Action, but now they're called the Healthy Climate Wisconsin group because they're trying to speak to moderates and convince people. They have spoken to the Public Service Commission and made a difference. They are, these are doctors and nurses that are stepping forward. So number one is, take your individual voice and join groups. So the best thing an individual can do is be less of an individual. When McKibben said that, join these powerful groups and amplify your voice, and things can happen at the local level. As far as the specific communities at risk, engagement of those leaders, that's happening around quite a bit, especially the Population Health Institute is working with disadvantaged communities. And but again, join groups. I'm sure you've heard of the Sunrise Movement and Fridays for the Future, these youth groups, very powerful. Yeah, glad you brought that up.
Hey, Jonathan. So I have a question. As I look around this room and everyone that I see in this room, about 95% of them are basically like the most engaged students on campus. Like they're all the same people that go to all the same things. So like, how do we get new people involved, and how do we make this message seem meaningful to people? Angie would like to follow up.
I'm going to ask a similar question about how, when you escape this specific echo chamber, what's the largest communication challenge that you've experienced? Which might be the same question that he just asked, but by me.
Yeah. So I'll simply say that I think the biggest change in getting the debate oriented in the right direction has come from the youth movement. There's not anyone that doesn't know Greta Thunberg. And so her movement and Fridays for the Future has been, I'd say, game-changing in many ways. And as far as speaking, getting out of the echo chamber and getting out there. Number one, I would say youth are powerful. Number two, just talking about it is important. Just getting out there and talking about it. There are studies, there are the communication science on climate change shows that a majority of Americans are fully on board and concerned. 67% of Americans, and about 70% of Wisconsinites, believe it or not, are really concerned about climate change. And so, unfortunately, the second rule of journalism is show both sides. Well, when one side is 99% and the other side is 1%, you're still showing both sides. And so you get this distortion in the news. But, as far as surveys of the public, people are concerned about it. So number one is get out there and talk about it. How to engage people out of the echo chamber? Just get out of the echo chamber. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you other than to not be shy, talk to other people and listen. The best way to communicate is to first listen, find out where people are. So a challenge, Rotary International, Madison, big group Rotary here. They asked me, would I talk about this issue? I knew my thing. Talk about this issue, but don't say the words climate change. And I said, that's easy. And I talked about climate extremes and flooding and going backwards and polio eradication, thinking about all the sewage contamination. And it wasn't that hard, but I had to be sensitive to who I was talking to. So, the other thing is, persuasion is a good thing. Persuasion means you are communicating and giving all the evidence that you know and letting people make a free choice. Coercion, bad word, coercion is intentionally hiding things to try to get people to make a decision that you want them to make. That's not free choice because they don't have all the information. So do everything we can to persuade and provide evidence. And part of persuasion is really knowing the audience. You can walk into a room and, fishermen are really concerned that trout are going to fly in the streams of Wisconsin. That's a front and center issue for fishermen. Farmers are, concerned about their crop. So understand where people are coming from. Try to be sensitive to that. And also know that in the Six Americas Survey of Attitudes, this is done every year, there are 9% that are in denial and will fight you and are unchangeable. But that 9%, which is very vocal, unfortunately, that 9% hasn't budged, hasn't increased, it hasn't decreased. So, you'll come upon people where it's just like, you're not going to change them. Just forget it. There are plenty of people just like, you're not going to change everybody. But there's a huge group in the middle that just keep talking about this issue and don't be shy.
We got time for one more quick one.
I have a question. Epidemiology question.
Yeah.
Most of our renewable electric generation is not dispatchable. The dispatchable one nuclear has horrifying risks, health risks, but they're tiny compared to the other risks that we have exposed ourselves in our lifestyle. So, interested in your thoughts about the future of generation like nuclear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think we need to have every option on the table. There's a whole department here of nuclear engineering that tell me, nuclear is totally different. Small reactors, thorium. So, and there's a lab here that does fusion, nuclear fusion. I think we need to have all options on the table. I wouldn't want to think about either or. I worry a little bit about nuclear as a opportunity cost. If you sink if you like overinvest in something like nuclear, which can be very expensive, are you stealing away from other opportunities? But, we have to revisit nuclear. Absolutely safer than coal and oil. But so we have to put all these things on the table and do full life cycle assessment. We need, speaking of climate justice, where we get our coal, where we mine for cobalt and lithium, that's a justice story, and we need to be mindful of sort of a full life cycle and say, oh, I just bought an electric car, check, I'm fine, right? We need to know where these things are coming from. And by the way, I haven't yet, but I will buy an electric car. But I do have solar panels and solar work, and heat pump. But no, we need to know where everything comes from, and so it's going to be not a silver bullet. It's going to be, as John Paul would say, silver buckshot. Although I hate that analogy. Forget about a gun analogy. Forget that. There's got to be 1,000 points of light. How about that?
Wonderful. Let's all give it up for Dr. Patz. All right, thank you so much for the wonderful keynote, Dr. Patz. With that, it's time for us to take a brief break and get some more food. So as you return from grabbing food, there's stuff out and there'll be more brought out. We encourage you to reach out and make a new friend and discuss with them or your discussion table the prompts that Lucas is about to put up on the screen. We're going to return and come back to our student sustainability panel promptly at 7:15, so be sure to be in your seat at that point so you don't miss out.